Hey guys, I want to talk to you today about Abraham and the faithfulness of God. There was a man in the Bible in Genesis chapter 12 named Abram, and he was a man who was a polytheist. He lived in a place called Ur of the Chaldeans. And one day God called him out of his people. He called him to a new place, to a new land. He said, I want you to leave everything that you know. I want you to take everything that you have, your wife, your family. I want you to leave. I want you to go to a new land that I'm going to promise to you. And here's the promise. I'm going to make a great nation out of you, and I'm going to bless the entire world through you, and in that, I'm also going to bless you. So Abraham, who is Abram at the time, he leaves from Ur of the Chaldeans to a land he doesn't know. And in this promise, God guarantees that Abram's going to have a son of his own house. See, here's the interesting thing. Abram didn't have a son of his own. He didn't have a flesh and blood heir of his household to pass everything on to. And at that time, that was a huge deal. I mean, much like today, that we would have an inheritance. But back then, you know, the drive to have somebody in your household was a big deal. And so we see this man who had not really had a relationship with this God before. He calls him out. And he says, I'll trust you. And God says, I'm going to promise by giving you a son. And in Genesis chapter 16, we see Abram become impatient with God and doubt God. And in doing so, what he does is he goes to his wife Sarah, who has a servant girl named Hagar. And he says, maybe we should help God. Maybe we should do this on our own. Maybe we should have this moment where we try to create a life on our own. Because God promised to give us a son. Maybe we need to help him. So Abraham sleeps with Hagar, his wife's servant girl. And she gets pregnant with a boy they named Ishmael. And this boy is not the promise. And because of that, we'll see later on where Abraham goes through heartache. So Abraham and his wife and this servant girl try to create the promised son. And God said, that's not him, but I will give you one. In chapter 17, God changes Abram's name to Abraham, and we see that he's going to become the father of many nations, and that God's going to bless him, and he's going to bless the entire world. He's the father of faith. As the story continues, we see God promises the actual covenant son to Abraham. His name is Isaac. God comes to Abraham at 99 and says, I'm going to give you a son through your wife Sarah, and she will have a son this time next year. And so God gives Abraham a son named Isaac, who is the promised son. Now the hard part about this is, when Isaac gets there, everybody knows Ishmael is not the son of promise. He was the son of the flesh. He was the son of the bondwoman, as Galatians says. So now, he has to go. So Abraham has to make the very tough decision to kick out Hagar and her son Ishmael, who's not the promise. But God gives Isaac to Abraham. Now, Abraham and Sarah are very old, and God proved his faithfulness to them by giving them a son in their old age. And when Isaac grows up, he's a young boy, and God calls to Abraham one day in Genesis chapter 22, and he says this, I want you to take your son, and I want you to go to the land of Moriah, and I want you to sacrifice him as a burnt offering to me. I want you to give him back to me. I gave him to you as a promise. I want you to give him back to me because you trust me and you don't doubt me. So Abraham takes him reluctantly, but he takes him to the land of Moriah, and he takes him and he builds an altar, and he puts his son on the altar. He takes a knife, and he's standing over the boy with a knife, and he raises the knife up like he's going to stab him. And in that moment, God speaks to him and says, Abraham, stop. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Now I know that you trust me, that you would even give me the promised son back to me, that you would kill him and sacrifice him to me. Now here's the interesting thing about this story. Is this story about the faithfulness of Abraham? Yes. Is it about the faith of him, of a man who comes out of his own people to a land he doesn't know? Yes. And trusts a God he's never seen? Yes. But what if this story is not about the faithfulness of Abraham so much? What if it's about the faithfulness of God? In that moment where you're called, let's say put yourself in Abraham's shoes. And God gives you a promise, and the only sign of the promise is a son. And then God says, I want you to kill him and give him back to me. What would you be thinking? Not only would I be struggling with the fact that my only son of my household at this time, because he had to kick Ishmael out, my only son of the household at this time, I'm losing. And not only that, he's the only sign of the promise that God gave to me. So I would be thinking, the sign of the promise is gone. It's over. This covenant, this deal, this promise that I made with God is done. It's over. It's gone. And I can only imagine Abraham feeling this and thinking this in his mind. That I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose my son. I don't want to lose the covenant with God. And I think that's what's so interesting about this story. That here's what I believe is what God is saying to you and me in this story. Maybe the story is not about the faithfulness of Abraham. Is it partly? Yes. James chapter 2 verse 23 says God counted Abraham's faith as righteousness, as honoring of God. But what if this story is about God's faithfulness? What if God is saying in this story, Abraham, even though you doubted me the first time, even though you weren't perfectly faithful, I will always be faithful to the covenant that I've made. What if God is telling us more about his own faithfulness than about our own faithfulness? What if God's displaying to us that even when we're not perfect, he says, I'm not going to relent. I'm not going to pull back the covenant that I have made because I'm faithful and I'm perfect. So friends, this story of Abraham is an amazing story of a man's faithfulness toward God and his trusting of a God that he hadn't seen before. But what? What if this story is more about the faithfulness of God than about the faithfulness of a man? Blessings.